How do I help promote better mental health in my workplace, in my relationships? We're going to be doing a 3-part series with Dr. Cath talking about this topic. So this is part 1 of that series. If you're interested in mental health, wanting more information about these topics, please click the subscription button below, as we'll be releasing new material all throughout this next year that will help you to understand and maintain better mental health in your life and in the life of those around you. So stay tuned, you're not going to want to miss this.
So earlier, I talked about mental health and how pervasive it is in our society. It's just so common. Most people, at least 50% of us, have or will be or are experiencing some kind of mental health issue. Now we have to kind of look at the impact of COVID. We don't know the numbers, but COVID is creating even more. As I work with people, I'm seeing more anxiety. I'm seeing just more struggle with the things that it's bringing up. COVID is kind of, it feels like the master of unpredictability in a sense. The numbers go up and they go down. We're moving in these waves of up and down, and numbers are down now, but are they going to go up? And will it be a big surge? Will it be a what's going to happen? We just don't know. Our experts are making guesses and trying to help to guide us to know how to change our behavior, to keep it as within reason as we can, but there's just so much we don't know. It's taken out the predictability in our life. Vaccines, are they coming? Aren't they coming? Oh, they didn't come. Now they're coming. The rollout's starting to happen. There's been unpredictability in regard to that. Our economy, how is this going to impact us? What is going to happen with my income as I'm moving forward? So there's unpredictability there. There's loneliness. People have lost people, lost things, lost work, lost their ability to provide for themselves. There's sadness, and I think there's some anger. Just when you have all those tender emotions, our anger comes in to help to protect us and give us the energy we need to keep going. So all those things, there's so many things happening, and what we actually need in our lives is we need predictability. We are people that want to have routines. We're people that want to be able to predict what's coming. We want rhythm. We want to know. We want familiarity. We just tend to lean into familiarity, predictability, rhythm, routine, all that kind of stuff. And so with the current situation, that's been kind of taken away from us, which is making it harder for some of us, most of us, and we struggle. So I want to talk about, in this session and in the next few sessions, I want to talk about what do you do to help other people? So there are things we can do to help ourselves, but what about for other people? What about in the community? When somebody that you love deeply, that you care about, or you just like a whole bunch is struggling, you can end up just feeling helpless because I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I can't make it better. I can't fix it. If I could give them a pill, I might do that. We want to feel better, and we respond to people that way. We also want to make other people feel better. We want it, and we want to make it for ourselves. And so we end up with this sense of helplessness when somebody's struggling. Sometimes a person gets into this anxiety loop or just this deep sadness or a sense of depression, and they can't seem to get themselves out. And that's hard to go through. It is also hard to care about one that's in a situation like that. And so we struggle sometimes because somebody else is struggling. And so sometimes we just need to struggle together. And how do you do that together? So I want to talk about some of that kind of stuff to help us with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take things that I've talked about in earlier sessions, and I'm going to apply those things now in helping other people. So the things that we need to remember, one is that everybody has a personal bent and bias. They have their own style of doing things. The second is that another thing that contributes to mental health is the environment that the person is in. And the third one is physical health factors. What are the things that are going on physically for the person that is impacting their mental health? So, if I'm wanting to work with somebody else and I want to bring out the best in them or help them to cope the best that they can in a difficult situation, I want to remember those three things and interpret it now. So number one, I want to understand their personal bent and biases. These are three really, really important pieces. So when it really comes down to it, the person that you are trying to help or support or walk alongside, they are actually the expert on what they need. You may have things, and I'm going to break this down as I move forward. You may have ways that you cope. You may have things that have really worked for you. And you want to give that to the other person. But before you can even talk to them, you need to understand their personal bent and biases. So some person might lean more towards anxiety. Another person might lean more towards depression. Another person might have one coping style or another. So we need to understand them first. The second thing is we need to encourage a healthy environment. Can we completely control the environment? I'm not sure that we can, but we can encourage health in the environment. Carl Rogers is a psychologist that used to work with people, and he talked about 3 atmospheric kind of things that increase the chance that a person will do better. And so he talked about empathy, and that's just caring for a person. I just am sorry that you're feeling that way. I'm doing my best to understand you as a different person than me. Congruence, which is authenticity. So I am going to be the same. I'm going to be real with you. I'm going to be congruent. What you see in me is what is really there. You can count on me. You know me. You can trust me. And the third is unconditional positive regard. When I'm in groups and we set up rules so that everybody feels like they can be honest and they can move forward and they can grow, one of the rules that always comes up, and I think I probably could say always, is a non-judgmental atmosphere or non-judgmental attitudes. Can I really be safe to talk to you? So people do best when they have that empathy, when they are working with authentic people, and when they don't have to fear being judged for what they're thinking or feeling. And so we need to encourage a healthy environment. And the third thing is that we need to make space for physical health. And that is more space for them to figure out how they need to be healthy. There are certain things that are important to physical health. We need to exercise. That keeps us strong, healthy. It releases those endorphins, which are those positive chemicals, those feel-good chemicals, I call it, plus some other chemicals. It's just, and all of them good. So we need to be healthy that way. A healthy diet, good sleeping patterns, all that makes a difference in how healthy a person is. So as we're working with somebody, we can make space for them to have that healthy environment. So all of these things can happen within different kinds of relationships. And you may be in a different position with different people, but all of these things can apply. So some of the relationships where these general 3 categories that I am going to break down in a couple of minutes where they fit is if you are a supervisor, there are things you can do just understanding a person. Thinking about the environment, supervisors really have a lot they can do for the environment. Making space for physical health, make sure there's adequate time for breaks and for things that keep people physically healthy. In parenting, all kinds of ways that there is ways that can be applied. Understanding your kid, your child, your teenager, understanding or helping them to stay healthy through their eating and sleeping. And what is the environment that you create in your home? In friendship, same kind of thing. How authentic are you in your friendships? In mentoring is known in the research to be really helpful for a sense of competence, for further growth, for getting better than you would have been if you had not had a mentor. In groups, what kind of atmosphere is in the group? You might not stop and do jumping jacks, but you can do things to create a safe environment there. Basically, any relationship that you're in where you want other people to do well, these things can apply. So let's break it down. I want to talk first about understanding a person's personal bents and biases. Individuality. Our temptation is that when I have worked through something myself, I want to get other people to do the same thing. And so I've heard people who come to talk to me say, this person called me and said, okay, this is what you do to get yourself in a better place, and list them off. People are individuals. And so, and you're going to see as we go through this section that we don't all cope best in the way that another person does. And so we really have to understand another person. Dr. Carolyn Leaf said this: as we think, we change the physical nature of our brain. The physical nature of our brain, the way it's put together, the size of the structures, that kind of stuff. As we think, we change the physical nature of our brain. As we consciously direct our thinking, we can wire out toxic patterns of thinking and replace them with healthy thoughts. When you think, you build thoughts, and these become physical substances in your brain. Now, the reason why I bring that up when I'm talking about individuality is because we all have a lifetime of working with our brain, of choosing thoughts, of having experiences, of feeling like we don't choose thoughts, instead leaning towards our negativity bias that we all tend to have. And that has wired our brain in certain ways, all by itself. So our brains have kind of all been shaped in different ways because nobody has experienced exactly the same life in exactly the same way with exactly the same kinds of physical strengths, physical in the brain strengths and weaknesses. So that is a really important thing for us to be aware of when we're looking at our individuality. That's part of what creates our bents and our biases. So based on these, we have typical ways that people cope. Coping is actually an individual thing. We don't tend to think of it as an individual thing, but it actually is. So, some of the typical ways that we cope, and there are a lot of ways. One is called cognitive reappraisal. This is where I think about my thinking, and I decide whether I want to go down that thinking pathway or not. We tend to think, when we think about what we're going through, we tend to think that we just leap right to feelings. That's actually not the case. Before we get to feelings, there are actually thoughts in there. And so when we cognitively reappraise what we're thinking, we can actually change our views, we can change our assumptions. Can that happen instantly? Sometimes somebody will get just a shift in perspective and it will just change things for them, and it's like they just feel different. That does happen sometimes. I've seen it. I think maybe more often people have to keep working, especially if they are deeply embedded ways of thinking that they have had for a long, long time. Then it takes more work, where I'm working on changing my view of things or people or life or the world or the future. But that is one of the ways that a person might choose to cope. It's very cognitive, very frontal lobe, very chosen based. A second way that we choose to cope, or that we can cope, is through social support. This one is huge. This one's really important. Something that I say to people is there is healing in community. Just that otherness, having somebody maybe that's going through the same thing or that just cares. So that can be friends, that can be family, that can be professionals. Whatever is around a person, whoever is around a person to help them make it through this situation that they're going through. Another thing that we use to support is substance use. As soon as I say that, our minds automatically go to drugs, alcohol, those kind of things. It also can include medication. So all of these have their upside and their downside. So if I'm going to medication, an antidepressant, because it's really helping me, that can be a really positive thing. However, if I choose a substance that limits my function or I'm overusing, so it's not being as helpful, that's not as good. Positive, negative. That can help with physical and mental symptoms. Relaxation, recreation. So those are the things that help a person feel at ease or reduce their cognitive or emotional stress load. And we all have different things that we might do for relaxation and recreation. Some people love to just get completely wet and go swimming, maybe swim some lengths, maybe play in the water, whatever it is. Some people love to do that. Some people love to walk. Lots of people love to walk out in nature. There just seems to be something about nature. Other people like to sweat hard and play a good hard hockey game or basketball game or drive a quad or whatever. There's all kinds of things that we can do for relaxation and recreation. And that is a coping strategy. And it can go too far, so I end up playing when I really should be working. Overactivity. This one, when I take it too far to overactivity and I'm overexerting myself or I'm overextending myself and doing more than is healthy, it can go negative. People that work on coping with things through doing things can have a propensity in that direction. Emotional release. So that could be venting. If you have a safe person to vent to, you could do that. It can be humor. A good laugh releases those endorphins again. And so watching a great comedy or a really funny stand-up comedian, there's an emotional release with that. Tears can be quite cathartic for some people. For some people, doing art, drawing, painting, coloring in a coloring book can be a great emotional release. Or music. Listening to good music, dancing to good music, playing or singing some good music. So emotional release is another one, and there's all kinds of it that people use to cope. Sometimes we just tolerate it. This is stressful. I'm going to white knuckle it. Or I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to focus on it, and I'm going to figure out how to get through this. I tolerate the stress, and I just get through. That is another way that we cope. Religiosity. So that can be prayer. That can be saying, I'm just going to release this. Some people will say, I'm releasing it to my higher power. Some people will say, to God, my Father. That can be just a release to be able to just surrender that up. Or faith. I believe in something. So religion. And a final way of coping or strategy is problem solving. This is very action oriented. Can be quite tied to tolerating. I confront the source. So I have a conflict with somebody or somebody's doing something hurtful to me. And so I confront that person, we get it worked out. Or I eliminate the stressor. So I am finding that every day that I go to work, I'm just so stressed out because of the drive to work. So I eliminate the stressor. I take the bus or the LRT to work instead. So that's problem solving. I deal directly with the thing that is creating the problem for me. So coping is something that there's been a fair amount of research on. And so we have kind of broken down coping into two major categories. The first general type of coping is called problem-focused coping. That is finding the solution. So now I'm starting to take the stuff that I was just talking about and kind of make it all logical, and I'll be showing you a chart after I've gone through these types. So The first type that was found by these researchers on the screen is problem solving. That is the one that's tackling the problem to remove the stressor. That's the last thing that I was talking about, or one of the last things. You solve the problem, I manage the stressors, maybe I get out of the relationship. The negative side of this is I can overwork, I can over-control. So now nobody's allowed to do anything that stresses me out, so everybody has to do things in this way at this time, and I end up controlling the situation too much, and then it becomes unappealing for the other people working with me. Or I jump from situation to situation. So this job gets too difficult, so then I move to this other job, and I jump from situation to situation. That's problem solving, problem focused. The second general type is emotion focused. And so I'm thinking more about what's going to help me on the inside. Might be self-soothing kind of stuff. It's emotional support. So in that, I may be regulating my own emotions in reaction to the stressors. So there are things that I can do that will regulate my emotions. Some people get down just into quietness in prayer, meditation, where I just kind of calm down that sympathetic system that I talked about in the session about anxiety. I'm calming down that sympathetic system, kicking in that parasympathetic system so that I'm calming myself on the inside. I'm paying attention to my emotions. Sometimes it's walking. People walk and it just seems to calm them down. We've got the endorphins going, that kind of thing. For some, it might be taking a bath or journaling, talking to a friend, but all of those things are focused on my emotions. The negatives about this one is that I can use things that are not so healthy for me to calm myself inside. After losing my sister when I was a child, I discovered that when I ate, it helped me to feel better. And so I started eating more and more and more, and I ended up gaining more weight. Eventually, that came back to kick me. And so that's a downside. Substance use, where I'm overusing something, or I'm abusing a substance, or I'm using a substance that isn't helping me to function, it's actually taking away from my function. Negative side of emotion-focused coping. Or harming myself. There are some people that find that it helps them emotionally, but then they end up hurting themselves because that's exactly what they're doing. So that's another downside to this kind of coping. Then another group of researchers broke down further the emotion-focused coping. The chart is coming in the next slide, but we'll stay on this one for a minute. So emotion-focused coping, where I'm paying attention to my emotions, can happen two ways. The first way is cognitive focus. So I talked about changing thoughts. I change my assumptions. I change my perspective about the stressor. So I'm focusing on my thoughts, my cognition, and I'm coping by doing that. So I think about it in a different way, or I go to a professional that helps me to get new perspectives or think differently. The second emotion-focused coping is occupation-focused, they call it, which is focusing more on behavior, what I'm doing. So I might change my activity. I might get up and do something. I might do a different routine that is going to help me to get distance from whatever the stressor is, or I take a different way to work. I'm going by the bus rather than driving to get away from the stressor. That's occupation focused. So on the next slide, you'll see the chart. So overall coping, it is all coping. But we each have our side. We each have our style. There's problem-focused that is just going after the thing that needs to be corrected, that we need fixed. So it's kind of that outward thing. The emotion-focused, where I'm reducing the emotional load in some way, support or listening. And then that one breaks down into those two styles, where I focus on my thoughts or I focus on my behaviors to help myself on the inside, in the emotions. So now bringing this back to helping other people. We need to help other people find their way of coping that's going to work for them best. That will require me to listen, to be aware of my own coping style, because I'm going to want to move them towards my coping style. If that works well for them, we're going to get along just fine. If it doesn't work so good for them, I might find myself wanting to push them in my direction. And so I want to talk to them. I want to listen to them and help them to figure out what's going to work for them and work along that coping style. So if they're a person that wants to be very cognitive focused in their style, I want to listen a lot to how they're thinking about things. But if they're more occupation focused, then I might want to talk to them a little bit about their activities and how they're doing things. So coping style is a really important thing. The personal bent and bias is really important. Understanding that. Along with this fits the kind of personalities that we have. So earlier, I talked about the type B personality. The type B personality tends more towards emotion-focused coping. It's more about what's happening on the inside. In the earlier session, I talked about control, challenge, and commitment. So control is about that attitude. What can I control? I can control my attitude. I can figure out what I can have some sense of control over. Challenge is about perspective, which is very linked together, but it's a very specific perspective where I'm looking at it as a challenge rather than a threat. And so I'm changing perspective on the inside. And the third is commitment. There's a value thing that I'm looking at. So that's the type B personality. I did mention the type A personality, but I want to dig into that one a little bit more. This one would be more likely to do the occupation or the cognitive focused coping. They'd be more likely to do the cognitive focused coping. So this type A personality, they're hardworking, they push themselves, achievement oriented. Where this is going is really important to them. They're competitive. I want to do really well, and they tend to do everything fast. We look at this personality as the one that's more likely for a heart attack, for a health breakdown. This has been questioned by Sapolsky. And he has actually shown us that is not necessarily the case, because there is one more trait, which is the one that we're more focused on and more concerned about. And that is anger and hostility. And that is the one that is more risky. That is the one that we want to be thinking about and we want to be working through. And this is particularly when the anger gets bottled up. When we're bottling up anger and holding it inside, emotions that are held under control tend to be more powerful. When we take the lid off and handle them in a healthy way, and I'm being really careful here, when we take the lid off and handle them in a healthy way, they lose their power. So I am not saying that you can explode at other people or you can vent your anger on other people. What I am saying is, number one, you want to be aware of it. And number two, you want to understand where it's coming from. As you understand where it's coming from, the anger can dissipate. I want to talk a little bit more about this whole idea about repressing strong emotions, because it does seem to increase that physiological response. So feelings. The purpose of a feeling is to feel. That's the purpose of a feeling. Feelings aren't right or wrong. They're just feelings. The way to diffuse a feeling is to feel it. So, if I'm feeling sad, and I've been here, and I'm holding that sadness down, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to let people know, I'm going to hold this, I'm going to cover it up. It gets stronger and stronger, and for me in my life, ended up leading to anger. Once I was able to understand what was underneath that anger that I was feeling, I was able to feel those feelings and let them dissipate. Not to say that you never feel any of it again, but the emotion wave goes up and then it goes back down again. So, is a type A personality dangerous? If hostility, especially repressed hostility, is there, then it can be. So we want to be aware of what we're thinking, what we're feeling, how we're coping, and then how others around us are doing those things. Listen to them, understand their personal bents and biases, and then help them to figure out what they need to do to cope. That's a good friend. That's a good partner. That's a good listener to be able to do that, understand the other person.
Thanks for watching part 1 of this video. You can click to part 2 if you want, or you can watch it later on. As you continue through this series on maintaining better mental health in our relationships and our workplaces, I believe you're going to get a lot out of it. So I would recommend you check out the next video. If you're interested in mental health just in a general sense, please subscribe to our channel, as we'll be having new updated videos concerning topics of mental health all throughout the course of this next year.